This will be for the con exercise. Construct sinusoidal functions. Now you need to be familiar with the basic sine and cosine functions. All right, just a quick review here. The graph in red is y equals sine of x. The one in blue is y equals negative sine of x. All right, so take note that the y equals sine of x starts at the midline and heads to the max, whereas negative sine of x starts at the midline and heads to the minimum. All right, and here we have in red the cosine of x and in blue the negative cosine of x. Notice that cosine starts at a max and then heads to the midline, whereas negative cosine of x starts at a minimum and heads to the midline. Okay, so the graph of a sinusoidal function intersects its midline at 0, 2, and then has a minimum at 3, negative 6. Write the formula of the function. X is in radians. All right, I highly recommend you draw a quick sketch. All right, so it doesn't have to be perfect, but I suggest you do this on your paper. All right, so it intersects the midline at x equals 0, y equals 2. And then it has a minimum point at x equals 3, y equals negative 6. All right, this is 3, negative 6. So let's see here. If you remember from the sine and negative sine graphs, the one that starts at the midline and heads to the minimum is going to be a negative sine. All right, and as far as the amplitude is concerned, going from midline to minimum, the amplitude travels from y equals 2 to y equals negative 6. All right, so the amplitude is just going to be the absolute value of 2 minus negative 6, which of course is just 8. Okay, again, midline to minimum would be the distance for the amplitude. So that's 8. I'm sorry, let me give you the equation here. We're looking at A times sine of bx plus c. Okay, so A, the absolute value of A is the amplitude, but amplitude is always positive, but we know this is negative because it went from midline to minimum. All right, and for the period, we know that equals 2 pi over b. Absolute value of b. All right, and we can see from here, we're going from midline to minimum, so that's only going to be a fourth of the period. So that horizontal distance from here to here is only going to be 1/4 of the period. Okay, so the period distance, 1/4 of the period, it runs from 0 to 3. So 1/4 of the period is 3. So the period is just going to be 3 times 4. All right. So 2 pi over b equals 12. All right. And multiplying both sides by b, it cancels here. And then dividing both sides by 12, it cancels here. And we have 2 over 12 pi, which is just pi over 6. So the value for b is just pi over 6, and that's times x. And finally, for the midline, which is the value for c, the midline is at 0, 2. Okay, so that's just going to be a plus 2. So that is your final answer. All right. So remember, A has to deal with amplitude, B has to deal with period, and C is the midline. All right, -8 sine pi over 6 plus 2. -8 sine parentheses pi over 6, and don't forget the x. I think I forgot the x, plus 2. Even for the ones that you get correct, I would check how they answered the question just to go over what you just did and see how it matches up with what they did. All right, the graph of a sine function has a maximum point at 0,5 and then a minimum at this point. Write the formula. All right, quick sketch here. It says it starts at the maximum. Okay, so it starts here at 0,5. And then it goes to the minimum at 2 pi -5. So it basically goes like that. And that's going to be your minimum. 2 pi comma -5. All right, let's do the amplitude first. We see that this goes from a max to a min. It goes from 5 to -5. So the amplitude is just going to be 5 minus -5, which of course is 10. All right, we'll save that for later. And then for the value of B, let's see the period. If you go from a max to a min, that's going to be half the period. Okay, the rest of the period would be min to max, right? So going from here to here, that's going to be half the period. All right, and we went from, this is the horizontal distance, so we went from x equals 0 to x equals 2 pi. All right, 2 pi minus 0, that's going to be 2 pi. So half the period is 2 pi. That means the period is just going to be 2 pi times 2, which of course is 4 pi. All right, finding the value of B, we know that the period equals 2 pi over the absolute value of B, which we said was 4 pi. Okay, multiplying both sides by B. You can cross multiply if you want, same thing. The B's cancel. Solving for B, divide both sides by 4 pi. Cancels here. 2 pi over 4 pi, the pi's canceled. 2 over 4 is 1/2. All right, so we got that. And finally, the value for C is the midline. Okay, the midline is going to be in between the max and the min. We see the max is at 5 and the minimum is at -5. What number is in between 5 and -5? 0. Okay, we don't even have to do any math there. All right, so C equals 0. The only thing I didn't do now is state if it were sine or cosine. Okay, you should have your sine and cosine graphs handy while you're doing these problems. But the one that starts at a max and then heads to the midline and to the min, that is a positive cosine. All right, so the formula we're looking at is A cosine of bx plus c. All right, same formula if this were the sine. All right, so positive cosine, we said the amplitude was 10 and this is positive cosine, so it's just going to be a 10. Okay, b times x, it's going to be 1/2 x, no pi this time, and then plus c. Well, c was just 0, okay, because the midline is exactly in between 5 and negative 5. So that's it. 10 cosine of 1/2 x. Okay, 10 cosine, parentheses, 1/2, hit the right arrow key, x. 10 cosine of 1/2 x. Okay, let's see what I did wrong. Okay, I made a mistake on the amplitude. It's actually 5 cosine of 1/2 x. Big mistake, because what I did was I went from max to min. I went from 5 to negative 5. I was supposed to take half of that number. Remember the amplitude, if you go from max to min, the amplitude is only going to be half of that. Okay, so I made a mistake and I went all the way. So I got 10 instead of 5. All right, so that is a 5. Very easy to make mistakes on these. All right, the graph of a sine function intersects midline at 0, 5, and then has a max at this point. All right, quick sketch. The midline is at 0, 5. And then the max is at 0.75, 7. So it heads up to the max. Okay, and that point is going to be 0.75, 7. All right. Now, if you look at your sine and cosine functions and negative sine, negative cosine functions, the one that goes from midline to maximum, that's going to be a positive sine function. Okay, so we're just doing A times sine bx plus c. All right, let's look at A, the amplitude. Amplitude goes from midline to max. Okay, we're going from 7 to 5. All right, so it's just 7 minus 5, and that equals 2. All right, this is a positive sine function. So we have 2 times the sine. And for the period, if you go to midline to max, that's only 1/4 of the period. All right, so from here to here, that's only 1/4 of the period. The horizontal distance, it goes from 0 to 0.75. So 0.75 minus 0 is just 0.75. But that is only 1/4 of the period, so we have to multiply this by 4, and that's going to equal 3. Now we use our formula for period. We know period is 2 pi over b, absolute value, and that's going to equal 3. All right, multiplying both sides by b, the b's cancel. Dividing both sides by 3, the 3's cancel. 2 pi over 3 equals b. All right, so bx is going to be 2 pi over 3 times x. Finally, for the midline, the plus c, that determines how high or low the graph is shifted. The midline is at 5. You look at the y-coordinate. Okay, if this graph kept going, this is midline, this is max, it would be like that. And that's the midline right there. So it's at x equals 5. 2 sine 2 pi over 3x plus 5. 2 sine 2 pi over 3 times x, outside parentheses, plus 5. All right, last one. Minimum point at 0, -3, midline at 1, 1. All right, let's see. Minimum's at 0, -3. So that's down here. 0, -3. And it goes to the midline at 1, 1. So it starts to head up. And that's 1, 1. All right. If this were to keep going, this is only the midline here. So this would go like that. And then like that. All right, because this is the minimum. If you look at your graphs for the sine, cosine, negative cosine, this is clearly a negative cosine. Okay, now we need to do the amplitude. Okay, the amplitude is the horizontal distance from the midline to the minimum. Okay, so that's 1 minus -3. That's going to be 1 minus -3. I don't need the absolute value because I put the bigger number first. So that's just going to be a 4. So that goes here. Now for the period, that is the horizontal distance. Okay, so this is going from a minimum to the midline. All right, minimum to midline. That's only 1/4 of the period. So it goes from 0 to 1. So that is just 1 unit. So the period, if 1/4 of the period is 1, the period is going to be 1 times 4, which is 4. All right, the formula for the period is 2 pi over the absolute value of b. That's going to equal 4. All right, times b on both sides. Cancels here. Divided by 4 on both sides. Cancels there. 2 over 4 is 1/2 times pi. So 1/2 pi is your value for b. All right, so that's going to be 1/2 pi times x. Don't forget the x, please. All right, remember we're using a times cosine of bx plus c. Finally, the midline. The y-coordinate is at y equals 1. All right, see this here? That's your midline right there. That's at y equals 1, so it's plus 1. All right, so that's it. You can, instead of 1/2 pi, you can just make it pi over 2 if you want. That's the same thing. Anyhow, -4 cosine pi over 2x plus 1. All right, -4 cosine, parentheses, pi slash 2, x, and the plus 1 is outside the parentheses. Like I said, you might want to, even if you get the answer correct, you might want to click on their answer and just see what they did. All right, but it's the same thing that I did in this case.